Good evening, you're watching The Big Story. I'm Dylan Ang, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. Ahead on the show, in an exclusive interview, 3 Singaporeans studying in Manchester tell me how they felt when they found out they had to suspend their studies and come home. But first, Malaysians with Singapore work permits will continue to work here with health screening and accommodation arrangements made for them. Senior Minister and Coordinating Minister for National Security Teo Chee Hean was also assured that Malaysia will facilitate the smooth transport of food across our land checkpoints. Meanwhile, the Manpower Ministry urged companies to impose a leave of absence on employees who return from overseas between March 14th and the 20th. From 11:59 p.m. tonight, all arriving travellers, including Singaporeans, will be issued a 14-day stay-home notice. On the economic front, DBS Bank said yesterday that a recession in Singapore appears inevitable. The bank expects total retrenchments for the year to reach about 24,500, slightly above the figure in 2009 during the global financial crisis. With an increasing number of countries enacting travel restrictions to curb the outbreak, it's no surprise that the aviation industry has taken a major hit. Earlier this month, the International Air Transport Association warned that the pandemic could cost passenger airlines up to $113 billion in lost revenue this year. Back home, Changi Airport reported a 32.8% year-on-year decline in passenger movements last month due to COVID-19. Earlier this week, Singapore Airlines said it would slash its capacity by half and that it expects to make further cuts to its capacity, given the growing scale of border controls globally. It's not the only airline to do so. Singapore-based Jetstar also announced it was grounding its entire fleet of 18 Airbus 320 aircraft, with all flights suspended for at least 3 weeks, from March 23rd to April 15. Other big carriers like Lufthansa, Delta and Qantas have announced significant cuts as well. Qantas is set to stop all international flights, and Europe's biggest carrier, Lufthansa, is set to cut 95% of its flights. To take this discussion further, I'm joined now by James Walton, Transportation, Hospitality and Services Sector Leader at Deloitte Southeast Asia. James, welcome to the show. Now, earlier this week, Singapore Airlines said it will operate only 50% of the capacity that had been originally scheduled up to end April. What lies ahead for SIA beyond that?
So right now, the outlook is obviously not good. We don't know exactly when the travel advisory bans will start lifting. We're seeing other markets around the world gradually introducing more and more measures to stop transport. So it's very difficult to even begin to guess when capacity will need to ramp up. As a result, SQ is offering a lot of open ticket options and encouraging people not to cancel tickets, but rather to extend tickets, in part because giving refunds means cash flow. And if they can get people to extend those open tickets, it can help mean that they don't have to make as many repayments as quickly.
I see. Now, SIA said it's actively taking steps to build up its liquidity. What can the company do, and can it survive without government support?
So SQ actually posted some pretty good results in the third quarter. Back in February, they announced a 10.9% growth, although the cargo business not doing quite so well. But obviously that was really before the storm hit. Analysts believe they have relatively strong liquidity at this point in time, enough to weather the storm. By comparison, the estimates worldwide is that 75% of airlines only have enough liquidity to last 2 to 3 months, which would mean we would see airlines going out of business by May if we don't see action soon. SQ seems to be a bit stronger. When you look at the measures they're taking, they've already announced pay cuts for senior leadership in the organization. They're trying to encourage people to take voluntary leave, which obviously would mean less salary as well, and probably deferring some capex. For other airlines around the world, we're seeing them extend their lines of credit with banks, asking the government for loans. Even selling aircraft and then leasing back is one of the options as well.
Now let's dive a little bit deeper into the aviation sector, of course. Will the aviation sector see its worst economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic compared to past crises like 9/11, for example?
So IATA estimated about 6 weeks ago that if the COVID virus at that time stayed roughly in the markets where it was, predominantly Asia, that the impact on the industry could be losses of $63 billion of revenue. But they then said that if it extended into Europe and the Americas, we could be looking at $113 billion. Now, obviously, that has now happened. And of that 113, we're expecting around about $50 billion of those losses are in Asia. So this is a very severe impact. But what we did see after 9/11, which was predominantly America focused, obviously, and even after SARS, which was Asia focused, was it took about 6 months, 9 months, but after that, flights started to happen again. At the end of the day, people want to travel. Business people need to travel to do business. So the market will eventually pick up. It's really a question of how long it takes and how long until people feel comfortable getting on a plane again.
That's a good point. Now, let's look to the future with added precautionary measures on flights. Do you see the sector picking up when countries eventually lift their travel restrictions?
Well, definitely. I mean, the sector's been growing year on year for many years now. And as I say, if you look back to post 9/11, it took about 6 to 9 months to pick up again. I think there will be a lot of bottled up travel. So as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing SQ trying to encourage people to delay their holidays. A lot of people will want to visit their family, visit their friends, and conduct business that has been delayed. So hopefully, once the COVID pandemic is over, 6 months, 9 months, I think we'll find that the aviation sector is back to what it is. The question is whether there is enough spending power, because obviously people's incomes are down, whether there is enough staff still in the sector after redundancies and potentially people walking away from the sector, and whether there is enough capacity, because some airlines have already gone out of business and others may follow.
Now, James, just to end off the show, which sector do you think will likely collapse first? Aviation or hospitality?
I'm hoping neither. The difference between aviation and hospitality is that aviation tends to be about a handful of big players. Most countries have one national airline, a couple of low-cost carriers, which means if the government and the industry players like IATA can support those organizations, they should be able to stay afloat. The difference with hospitality, of course, is you're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of hotels, restaurants, and ultimately, some will go out of business. It's impossible for the government to help all. It's impossible for all to stay in business in a crisis like this. So unfortunately, I think the bigger impact in the longer term will be on a lot of boutique hotels, smaller hospitality organizations that simply don't have the cash flow or the means to continue over a protracted crisis.
Well, thank you so much for your insights, James.
Thank you.
Now, that was, of course, James Walton, Transportation, Hospitality and Services Sector Leader at Deloitte Southeast Asia. In other news, California is ordering its nearly 40 million residents to stay home until further notice to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. This order marks the first statewide mandatory restrictions issued in the US to help combat the outbreak. 19 people have died and more than 900 have tested positive for COVID-19 in California. I spoke to our US Bureau Chief, Nirmal Ghosh, earlier today to find out more about the latest developments stateside. Nirmal, President Donald Trump continually calls COVID-19 the Chinese virus. Are relations between the US and China at breaking points?
I think one would have to say yes to that. This rift is not going to be over anytime soon and has deepened mutual suspicion as each country tries to shift blame. We have a deepening argument. We have allegations flying back and forth, and President Trump has doubled down on calling it the Chinese virus. This works well with his base as it changes the narrative. It deflects blame from his own administration, which, while it reacted very quickly at first, then sort of let things drift and is now facing a massive crisis and loss of confidence. Meanwhile, of course, over in China, the CCP, the Communist Party, clearly knows that domestic anger about its initial suppression of the emergence of this virus undermines the regime's legitimacy, and so it is now going all out, directing domestic discontent towards the United States. It suits both countries to cover up their failings by blaming each other, and when you set that in the context of the pretty robust strategic competition we have now, one would have to say this is a very low point.
Now, earlier this week, Beijing demanded that 13 American journalists working for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal and Washington Post hand back their press cards within 10 days, effectively expelling them. How has the US responded?
Well, the US has condemned it, of course, and just yesterday a senior State Department official was briefing journalists and he said, look, we want reciprocity. The Chinese say this is reciprocal in return for the US designating several Chinese media agencies as government entities and capping the number of Chinese employees they can have out here. So the US says these are government entities, while those American media organizations are not. So how is this possibly reciprocal? Besides, foreign journalists and in fact diplomats as well operate under a restrictive environment in China, which is not the case in the US. So again, where is the reciprocity? So the two are at totally cross purposes, and it is hard to see this ending or being resolved in a hurry, and it fuels the bad blood between the two countries.
Namo, despite the US government saying Americans should avoid groups of more than 10 people, videos of spring break revelry have surfaced. Do you foresee stricter social distancing measures?
It is possible. There has been a steady tightening that we have seen, but it is a mix of orders, like for restaurants and bars to offer only takeout or delivery, and advisories. States can interpret or issue their own guidelines. But as the number of cases rises and public anxiety spreads, there will be an incentive to order stricter measures because local politicians will have to respond to concerns. Right now, it is a tightrope, of course. Do you order harsh social distancing or shelter in place, which means stay at home, which is crashing the economy, or do you leave some leeway which allows some economic activity to take place against the risk of the health system becoming overwhelmed and many more people dying, and that will anyway crash the economy?
Many European countries are in lockdown. Our neighbour across the causeway, of course, has enforced a 2-week movement control order as well. What about the US? How feasible is it?
Right, so we've seen countries in Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia making these kinds of choices. But then there's also the question of culture. Apart from the fact that humans are, of course, naturally gregarious, America in particular is a very diverse society and a freewheeling kind of individualistic society. There is an inbuilt resistance to government trying to make people do things. But yes, as the numbers go up, and they will, public opinion may be more receptive across the country to stronger measures. And if it reaches that stage, I don't think you're going to expect it to be as watertight as, say, in Wuhan, but one can only hope it will be effective enough. There is considerable public anxiety and awareness, but the messages have been a little bit mixed. For example, you have had prominent conservative TV hosts with millions of followers until very recently downplaying the virus. So the response at the population level has been a bit patchy. There's a lot more that can be done, and we can watch New York City in that regard in the coming days.
Thank you, Nirmal, for your insights.
Thank you.
That was US Bureau Chief Nirmal Ghosh on the situation in the US. As the US potentially considers a lockdown and tethers on the brink of a recession, Nirmal checked in with Danny Kwa, Dean and Lee Ka-shing Professor in Economics at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, to find out his thoughts. Here's an excerpt of the interview from this week's episode of Asian Insider.
Dr. Kwa, a last question for you before we wrap up. What is the view of the US out there about the way the US is handling this and the potential ramifications in terms of the impact of a very, very sharp recession in the US, sharp and sudden recession?
There are quite a number of observers in Asia who are looking on at how the Trump administration has been handling this crisis with considerable horror. Many places in Asia have worked very hard at containment, at detection, and have been able to bring down dramatically the infection rate in our societies. Wuhan itself, which was running several thousand new cases a day at the height in January and February, yesterday reported 0 new cases. There are strategies that work. There are containment strategies that work. And many in Asia who've acknowledged the dangers and risk have taken on exactly these strategies. But right now, we're confronted with a whole rest of the world, and we're worrying about now importing cases of COVID-19. So when we see the Trump administration switching 180 degrees in the space of a week between, on the one extreme, Donald Trump suggesting that all of this is just a hoax, to the realization that we're going to be seeing massive fatalities across different parts of the world, it is sobering and it is frightening, because the world needs to come together. Our traditional leadership in the global economy that has been able to deal with these kinds of emergencies seem to have left the building. And so we're looking on in horror. The level of technical expertise in the United States, in the United Kingdom, is so considerable. The wisdom that's been built up on how to deal with pandemics is so deep, but a lot of that seems to be being ignored by Western political leaders, by America's political leaders. So we're looking on with some worry.
Other COVID-19 developments beyond our borders. The death toll in Italy rose in the past 24 hours by 427 to just over 3,405, overtaking the total number of deaths so far registered in China. China saw 0 local cases for the second straight day. All of the 39 new cases reported yesterday were imported. Malaysia will deploy its army from Sunday to assist police in enforcing the restricted movement order. Meanwhile, former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad is observing self-quarantine after coming into close contact with an MP who was tested positive for COVID-19. Malaysia reported 110 new cases yesterday, with the total number of cases standing at 900. The Olympic flame arrived in Japan this afternoon to 0 spectators, amid speculations that the Tokyo Olympics will be postponed or cancelled. Japan's Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso called the 2020 Games cursed. He pointed out that extraordinary circumstances seem to overshadow the Olympics. Mr. Aso said, quote, "It's a problem that's happened every 40 years. It's the cursed Olympics, and that's a fact." Well, back in 1940, expansion war between Japan and China forced the abandoning of planned summer games in Tokyo and winter games in Sapporo. In 1980, the Moscow Olympics were boycotted by many Western countries, as well as Japan, in protest against the invasion by the then Soviet Union into Afghanistan the previous year. But Japanese officials and the International Olympic Committee have again insisted that the 2020 Olympics would go ahead as planned. Singaporean and permanent residents studying in the UK who are trying to secure flights back to Singapore can register with the government for tickets. The Foreign Affairs Ministry announced a special arrangement with Singapore Airlines to fly these students home amid the COVID-19 outbreak. The UK is one of the most popular destinations for Singaporeans pursuing higher education, with about 6,750 Singapore students there in the 2018-2019 academic year. I spoke to a few Singaporean students yesterday who have since secured their seats on the special arrangement flights. 3 Singaporean students currently studying at the University of Manchester in the UK join me now to talk about their plans to return to Singapore. The Education Ministry had earlier issued a directive for Singaporeans studying abroad to return. Thanks for taking the time, guys. Now, before we begin, let's get everyone to introduce themselves. What are you studying and which year are you in?
Hi, I'm Angelina. I'm studying Economics and Finance and I'm in my second year.
Hi, my name is Melvin and I'm studying medicine, also in my second year.
Hi, my name is Teresa and I'll be studying social anthropology, also in my second year.
Nice. Now guys, what was your initial reaction when you found out that you had to come back?
So I think in the beginning, we weren't sure of like how serious the callback was. I think like we were just like just figuring out like how urgent it was like, for us to need the need for us to go back. Yeah, I think as the day goes by and I hear from my friends all going back, like from all over the world, I think it became like quite clear that we have to go back too. Yeah.
Now, speaking of reactions, what about your family's reaction?
I think my parents were very concerned, and initially they were okay with me flying back like late next week or by the end of the month. But every day different news comes up, and one day they called me and they just told me to come home tomorrow, like just get the earliest flight. I think they were just very scared that I would be stuck here and unable to go home. For me, I booked my flight for next week, but I decided to change it to an earlier date, like tomorrow. But there were some problems with it. My other friend tried to book the same flight, but Singapore Airlines called them and told them that it was cancelled. So there was a lot of uncertainty on whether I can fly the flight and whether the flights are cancelled, because a lot of our friends are facing flights that are being cancelled for this week. So yeah, that's a problem.
Now, on the academic front, have you received instructions on how the rest of your semester will continue?
I think that's dependent on like our department, because I think information from the school is not very uniform. So like many of us still haven't received any information on how our exams are going to go on. But as of now, the school has like issued a formal statement that school will be held online even after Easter.
Now, I understand that the UK is considering a partial lockdown in London, but how is the situation like in Manchester? Are the streets quieter? Do you find that most people are staying at home?
the streets are definitely like there are less people around, but we can still like see people walking around, and usually the locals the locals are still out and about, but there are definitely much fewer students on the streets. Definitely like near the uni. Yeah.
Now, a few weeks ago, a Singaporean student was beaten up in London. Have you had your share of xenophobic or racist encounters since the coronavirus outbreak?
Personally, I haven't encountered anything. The people in uni are generally quite open. Like they don't like stereotype people that much. So I haven't had any experience. I'm not sure. Like even my friends, like right here in Manchester is quite alright, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, but we do hear like some side stories on like how like people do face like slight discrimination when they wear like masks to school and stuff. But it's not very, very serious.
Yeah, it's not overtly like violent or aggressive. It's just like more subtle. Yeah.
Okay. Now, guys, on the flip side, is it more of a community togetherness in Manchester?
Yeah, definitely. At least I know that I have my flatmates here, and the Singaporean community is helping us a lot by sending us information, messages, and I think they are creating a support group for the people who are choosing to stay here. So I think that's very useful, because there are some people who might not be able to go home, so there will be like a good community for them.
Well, thank you everyone. It's been a pleasure. We've been speaking to 3 Singaporean students at the University of Manchester in the UK. And guys, we wish you a safe flight home. And those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com. And be sure to tune in on Monday for a special edition of The Big Story. Minister for the Environment and Water Resources, Masagos Zulkifli, will be part of an expert panel on Singapore's fight for hygiene awareness in our battle against COVID-19. Before I go, Wonder Woman actress Gal Gadot shared a video earlier this week of 25 celebrities singing the John Lennon song Imagine. This in an effort to ease people's concerns about the coronavirus pandemic. While it's garnered more than 1.3 million likes, the video has received its fair share of criticism. Here's a listen and let us know what you think in the comments section below. I'm Dylan Ang. Have a great weekend.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try.
No hell below us.
Above us only sky.
Imagine all the people
living for today. Yeah.
Imagine there's no countries, yeah.
It isn't hard to do.
Nothing to kill or die for.
And no religion too.
Imagine all the people. Yeah.